That night, Sloane pulled out my chair, placing her purse down like a territorial flag right at the head of the table. My seat for 31 years. I smiled, yielded the space, poured the wine, and let everyone think I was weak. They did not know the envelope in my coat pocket was enough to change the entire address of the party. I did not fight for the chair. I just stood up and read my announcement aloud. I am Eleanor Whitlow. I am 62 years old, widowed, and I live in Maple Ridge, Illinois, a place where the maples turn a violent shade of red in October and the sidewalks are stubbornly uneven. For my work, I am a part-time counselor at Haven Oaks Community Services, where I listen to the quiet grief of others. A job that has taught me more about listening to what is not said than what is. My son is Daniel Whitlow. He is 34, and he is married to Sloane Hart. Sloane is not just any Hart. She is a Hart from the Hart family, the ones whose name is etched onto the brass plaque of the local library they funded and the golf club they built. My story, or perhaps the end of one story and the beginning of another, started on a Sunday. The yellow lamps in my dining room were on, casting a warm, buttery light over the heavy walnut table. It was my table, bought with my husband's life insurance, a solid, dependable thing, and at its head was my chair. It was just a chair, carved wood and upholstered seating, but it was a silent ritual. For 31 years, it was where I sat, where I had served countless meals, where I had presided over birthdays and mourned losses. Sloane arrived early, exactly at 4:30. Daniel trailed behind her, already looking flustered. "Eleanor," she said, not as a greeting, but as an announcement. She kissed the air near my cheek, her perfume a sharp, expensive floral that seemed to cut through the smell of the roasting chicken. "The house feels warm. Daniel, check the thermostat. Will you?" She walked directly into the kitchen, her heels clicking with an authority that did not belong to her in this house. She peered into the oven, then at the potatoes I was mashing. "Are those with full cream?" Her voice was that specific brand of coldly polite that high society women use to establish control. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "They are." "Sloane." "It is a Sunday dinner," I said, keeping my own voice level. "It is just... Caroline is sending something over." She was so worried about the menu, as if on cue. The doorbell rang. It was a delivery driver, holding a wooden crate. Inside were 2 bottles of French wine I could never afford, and a small, stiff note. "A small favour. Eleanor, do enjoy. And please, nothing fried, we must watch Daniel's health." Caroline Hart, a woman who had never stepped foot in my home, was now dictating my menu through an emissary. Daniel, who had returned from the thermostat, avoided my eyes. He just picked up one of the bottles. "That is very generous of her. Sloane, make sure to thank her." I felt the shift then, the subtle, tectonic movement of power. Sloane smiled, a small, tight motion of her lips. "Of course. Now, where should we all sit? I think it is time we followed some new rules." "It is better if I sit where I can help you serve." She was already moving toward the dining room, assessing the table. This was not a suggestion. It was the beginning of a coup, and it started not with a shout, but with a quiet rearrangement of place settings. She was planning to take my chair. I watched her go, the polite tyrant in a cashmere sweater. My hand instinctively went to the pocket of my linen jacket, the one hanging on the coat rack. My fingers brushed against the thick, crisp paper of an envelope. It was heavy. It contained the original, notarized, and sole ownership deed to the townhouse on Sycamore Street, the one Daniel and Sloane currently lived in, the house they called theirs, but which the state of Illinois, and my bank, knew was unequivocally mine. I had come to this house to prepare a meal. I had not realized I was also preparing for a war. When the chicken was carved and the potatoes were spooned into a serving bowl full fat cream, and all I called them to the table, Daniel, Sloane, and the 2 heart cousins she had brought along for reinforcement, I watched as Sloane moved. She did not hesitate. She walked directly to the head of the table. The sound of the heavy walnut chair leg scraping against the hardwood floor was loud in the quiet room. She slid into the seat. My seat. She placed her napkin in her lap, looked up at me standing by the kitchen doorway, and offered a thin, triumphant smile. I returned it with a different one, a smile that was perfectly, terribly calm. I let her have the chair. For now. As I took a seat, not my usual one, but one near the window, as Sloane had directed, the scene in front of me dissolved, and my mind drifted back. 10 years. It had been 10 years since I stood on the sidewalk on Sycamore Street, holding the keys to that townhouse. I bought it with the last of my savings and the entirety of my late husband's life insurance. It was a brick-fronted, 2-bedroom place with a small patch of grass out back. It was not a heart mansion, but it was solid. It was meant to be Daniel's foundation, a way for him to start his adult life without the burden of rent, a foothold in a world I knew was difficult. I never transferred the deed. At first, it was practical. The gift tax was astronomical, and the conveyance fees were something I, on a non-profit salary, could not justify. We will sort it out when you are more settled. Honey, I had told him. He had agreed, eager to just move in. And then, when you are more settled, never came. The paperwork remained in my name. The mortgage was paid off by me. The property taxes, year after year, were billed to Eleanor Whitlow. Then Sloane entered the picture, all sharp angles and inherited confidence. The shift was subtle at first. Our weekly Sunday phone calls, once a rambling 2-hour affair, were cut short. "Mum, I am busy," Daniel would say, his voice strained and distant. "Sloane and I have a reservation." Then it became, "Mom, I have to go. Sloane needs me." Finally, just, "I am busy." The messages were always the same. I was an interruption. The real education began with their engagement. I was not told. I found out because a distant cousin, who followed Sloane on social media, tagged me by mistake in a photo. There they were. Daniel in a suit I did not recognize. Sloane in white, surrounded by 60 smiling guests at the Hart Country Club. The caption read, "A surprise, intimate engagement party for our dearest Sloane and Daniel." 60 people. Intimate. I was not one of them. I stared at the photo on my phone for an hour, my coffee growing cold, until the tag was quietly removed. I called Daniel. He did not pick up. He texted back 4 hours later. "It all happened so fast. Mum, Sloane's parents wanted a small thing. I will call you later to explain." He never did. The silence grew louder. Last winter. I came down with a flu that settled in my chest. A rattling, ugly sickness. I was 61 then, alone, and genuinely frightened for a day or two. I texted Daniel, not asking for him to come, just telling him I was unwell. His reply came 6 hours later, long after my fever had broken. "That sounds rough. Mum, you should drink more ginger tea. That was it. No call. No, do you need anything? Just ginger tea. That night, I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, and found the large wall calendar I kept for my appointments at Haven Oaks. I took a red felt-tip pen. For every day he had not called since the engagement. I put a small, neat X in the corner of the box. I started counting the silences. At first, I did it out of hurt. But as the months passed, the rows of red X's became something else. They were not a record of my pain. They were a record of my survival. Each mark was a day I had gotten through by myself. Each red X was a small, incremental lesson in detachment. The grief of losing my son, in increments, turned into the clarity of seeing the man he had become. The page for March was almost solid red. I was graduating. I was moving from pain to being awake. I looked down at my hands, resting on the table in my own dining room, a guest in my own home. I saw the calluses from decades of gardening, the slightly swollen knuckle from closing that old storm door. These were not the manicured, pale hands of Caroline Hart. I turned them over, saw the lines. I thought of the pen sitting in my purse, next to the envelope. I looked at my hands, mirrored in the dark window beside me, and I knew the truth. I was still strong enough to sign. The dinner began. I had intended to serve the chicken myself, from my end of the table, but Sloane was already standing, carving knife in hand. "Let me." "Eleanor," she said, sawing inefficiently at the breast. "You just sit. You must be tired." Caroline Hart, who had arrived just moments after her wine delivery, gave a tight smile from across the table. "This is just so cozy. Eleanor? A lovely little house for one." She took a sip of her own wine. "It is a shame about the kitchen, though so dark. But I am sure you could get a good price for the land. A full upgrade would be necessary. Of course, when you sell. When I sell. Not if." The assumption hung in the air, thick as the steam from the potatoes. Sloane was in full command. She had indeed arranged the seating. Daniel, naturally, was placed on her right, his cousins on her left. I was placed by the far window, for the good light, she'd claimed, though the sun had already set, leaving me in the dimmest spot. She called out for the dishes. "Daniel, pass the beans." "No, not those. The ones Caroline sent." He did, without looking at me. He was animated, laughing too loudly at a story one of the cousins told about the Harts' winter trip to Aspen. He talked about new standards and family expectations. He was speaking the language of the Harts, a dialect of privilege and entitlement I had never taught him. He spoke about everything but the townhouse, his foundation, the bricks and mortar I had provided. I watched them. It was like a game of chess, and I was the only one who could see the entire board. Sloane, at the head of the table, was the queen, controlling the center. She leaned forward when she spoke, claiming the air itself. And Daniel was a pawn, trying desperately to be a knight. His chair was angled slightly away from me, physically drifting toward her sphere of influence. Every time she laughed, he shifted, a fraction of an inch closer to her orbit, a fraction of an inch farther from me. "It is so important to maintain these properties," Caroline mused, swirling her glass. "We are having the Sycamore house, Daniel's house, repainted in the spring. A much more modern grey. A light stone." Sloane corrected her. "Grey is over." She turned to me, her smile a needle wrapped in silk. "You will have to come see it when it is done. Eleanor. In fact, if this little place ever gets to be too much for you, you can always come stay with us for a few days. If it gets too cramped here." The insult was perfectly delivered. My home, dismissed as a little place. My future, dismissed as a burden they might, graciously, accommodate for a few days. I felt the vibration in my jacket pocket. It was not a call, just the soft buzz of a text message. I excused myself quietly. More water. I murmured and stepped into the hallway, just out of sight. The number was not saved in my phone, but I knew who it was. The message was from Grant Alder, my lawyer. It was brief, professional, and utterly devastating. "Deposit cleared. Escrow is funded. The buyer is committed. We are on schedule. Congratulations. Eleanor." I read it twice. The buyer had put down the deposit. The sale of the townhouse on Sycamore Street was no longer a plan. It was a contractual reality. I took a deep, steadying breath. I closed my eyes for just a second, feeling the cold, hard finality of it. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. I walked back to the dining room. The conversation had not missed me. Sloane was now describing the kitchen she planned to install in my townhouse. I picked up the bottle of Caroline's expensive wine. I walked over to Sloane, who was sitting in my chair. I leaned in, pouring a generous amount into her glass. The red liquid swirled. She looked up at me, surprised by the service. "Congratulations." "Sloane?" I said, my voice quiet, but clear. "On the new house?" She smiled, a genuinely pleased, smug smile. "Thank you. Eleanor? It is about time, is not it?" She thought I was congratulating her on the paint, on the new kitchen, on her victory in sitting at my table. She had no idea I was congratulating her on an impending eviction. No one understood the hidden meaning, except me. My congratulations to Sloane that night was not the beginning. The beginning had happened 3 weeks earlier, the Monday after I marked the 30-second red X on my kitchen calendar. It started in the small, fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel in my bedroom closet. I spun the dial, a combination I had not used in 5 years, and the heavy door clicked open. The air inside was stale. I pulled out the file labelled Sycamore. There it was, the original deed of trust, crisp and official, bearing one name, Eleanor Whitlow. Beneath it, the contract for the new roof I had paid for 3 years ago, a $5,000 expense. The fire insurance policy, renewed last June, also paid by me. Every document, every piece of paper that legally defined the existence of that house spoke only of me. From the safe, I went to my study. I sat at my old desktop and opened my email archive. I searched for Daniel and property tax. The results were a digital age archaeology of his neglect. My emails from 2018. "Daniel, the county tax bill is due. Did you get the mail?" His reply, "Oh, must have missed it. Mum, can you cover it? I'll pay you back." He never did. My emails from 2020. "Honey, the bill came to me again. Please remember to set up mail forwarding." No reply. By 2023, the bills just came directly to my inbox, and I paid them without asking. He had never, not once, paid the taxes on the house he called his. Then, I did the thing I hated most. I opened my social media. Sloane's profile was public, a curated gallery of her perfect life. I scrolled. There was a photo of her in my garden, holding a glass of champagne. The caption, "Finally getting our backyard oasis in order." There was another, A selfie in the master bathroom, design day, planning to rip out all this old tile or home. It was a stream of territorial claims, a public declaration of ownership that had no basis in reality. She was not just living in my house, she was actively erasing me from it, one Instagram post at a time. The next day, I called Grant Alder. He was a civil attorney, a name I found through the Bar Association, specifically chosen because he had no connections to the Hart family. His office was spare, clean, and offered bad coffee. I laid the documents on his desk, the deed, the tax receipts, the roofing contract. He reviewed them in silence for 10 minutes. He did not coddle me. He did not offer sympathy. He just nodded. "Your file is immaculate, Mrs. Whitlow. Your ownership is not in question. They are tenants at will. You have been a very generous and very unprotected landlord. What are my options?" "Two," he said, leaning back. "Route 1, we formalize their tenancy. We draft a legally binding lease agreement with strict terms, rent at market rate, clear rules on alterations, penalties for default. It gives you control and an income stream." I thought about it for a second. More arguments, more chasing them for rent, more entanglement. What is Route 2? "You sell," he said. "It's your asset. You liquidate it. The market in Maple Ridge is high. It's a clean, final transaction. You sever the tie." He saw the look on my face. I did not want to be their landlord. I did not want to be tied to them at all. I was not a bank. I was a mother, and I was being treated like a doormat. "Sell," I said. The word felt solid in my mouth. I choose to sell. Respect for myself is more important than saving face for them. Grant nodded, not surprised. "Good. I have a list of investors who look for exactly this type of property. Quick. All cash offers. No messy open houses. It will be fast." It was. He made one phone call. An offer was made within 24 hours, at full asking price. The contract was drawn up. The closing date was set for 21 days from then. As I signed the document, I looked at my calendar. 21 days. The Sunday dinner with the Harts was in 19. The timing was perfect. I would be able to deliver a legally binding, fully executed notice after the sale was no longer theoretical, but a contractual fact. I asked Grant to prepare the formal notice to quit, citing the concluded sale. He put it, along with a copy of the signed sales agreement, in a thick manila envelope. That Sunday morning, I took the sealed envelope from my study. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my black linen jacket. It was just paper, but it felt as light as freedom and as heavy as a gravestone. The meeting to finalize the sale was not at a law office. It was at a sterile, third-party notary public's office downtown, 5 days before the Sunday dinner. The air smelled of burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I sat at a pale laminate table. The notary, a young woman who looked bored, slid a stack of papers toward me. "You need to initial here, and sign here, attesting that you are Eleanor Whitlow, the sole and legal owner of the property at 41 Sycamore Street," she recited, "and that no other party holds any claim, verbal or written, to the title, and that you have not entered into any prior contract of transfer." I looked at that line. No other party holds any claim, verbal or written. All those years of paying taxes, of replacing the roof, of listening to Sloane post about our home, had solidified into this one legal truth. My hand did not shake. "That is correct," I said. My signature was dark blue ink. The notary applied her embossing stamp. The sound was a heavy, satisfying thud. It was finished. The foundation was secure. Grant had been clear about the next step. They are tenants at will, Eleanor. They have no lease, but the law requires notice. Given the finalized sale to the new owners, the contract stipulates we provide notice of vacancy. He had paused. I have included a humanitarian clause. 14 days. 14 days. It seemed both agonizingly short and infinitely generous. 14 days to pack up 10 years of a life they had taken for granted. I approved the clause. Grant then drafted the official letter. It was a masterpiece of cold, legal prose. It listed the date, the time, the address of the property, and the legal requirement to vacate. It cited the finalized contract of sale. At the bottom, below my signature line, was another line. Witness. You must have a witness. Eleanor. Grant had insisted over the phone. Someone neutral, who is physically present, who can see you hand them the document and attest that they received it. It stops them from claiming later that it never happened. I knew exactly who to call. Martha Lowell. Martha lived 2 doors down from me, was 60 years old, and was a retired high school principal. She was a woman who had seen and dealt with every form of youthful arrogance and adult evasion. She had watched Daniel grow up, and she had been politely cordial to me about how infrequently he visited once Sloane was in the picture. I called her. Martha, I know this is sudden, but I am having a small dinner party this Sunday. It might be difficult. I would be deeply grateful if you could stop by for dessert. Around 8. There was a long pause on the line. Martha missed nothing. Dessert, Eleanor. Or she searched for the word. Backup. A witness, Martha, I said, the word tasting strange. I will bring my own pen, she said. 8 o'clock. Grant's final piece of advice was the most crucial. They will yell, Eleanor. They will accuse you. They will try to make this about emotion. It is not. It is a transaction that has ended. I want you to record it. Illinois is a 2-party consent state, but you will be in your own home, formally announcing the recording to document the delivery of a legal notice. It is a permissible shield. Announce it, turn it on, and read the letter. Do not get pulled into an argument about the past. Stick to the paper in your hand. That Sunday, hours before they arrived, I prepared my tools. I found the small, slim digital recorder I sometimes used for my session notes at Haven Oaks. I inserted new batteries. I pressed record and stop 3 times to make sure the click was quiet. The small red light was bright. I slipped it into the left pocket of my black jacket. Next, I prepared the envelopes. Grant had given me 2. The first, the primary one, contained the official, notarized notice to vacate and a copy of the finalized sales agreement, with the price blacked out that was none of their business. The second envelope was Grant's idea. It was the proof of funds from the buyer. It was a single-page wire transfer confirmation from the buyer's bank to the escrow company. It showed a deposit, a very real, very large sum of money, over $60,000, had already cleared. This was not a bluff. This was not a threat. This was a concluded fact. I put both envelopes in the right pocket of my jacket. Then, I stood in my bedroom mirror. I looked at the woman reflected there. Her hair was tidy. Her face was calm. I pulled the letter from the first envelope. I held it with both hands. I took a breath. Before we have dessert, I practiced. my voice coming out too high. I cleared my throat. I stood up straighter, grounding myself on my own bedroom floor. I tried again, pitching my voice low, slow, and steady. The voice I used at Haven Oaks when I had to deliver news no one wanted to hear. Before we proceed to dessert, I have a formal announcement to make regarding the property on Sycamore Street. I read the entire letter aloud to my own reflection. I did not falter. I did not add a single word of apology. My hands were perfectly still. I was ready. The invitation was the first move. I did not text. I called Daniel's phone, knowing Sloane would be the one to orchestrate the reply. "Daniel," I said, my voice warm, practiced. "I was hoping you, Sloane, and her parents could come for a proper Sunday dinner, a real get-to-know-you meal." There was a muffled sound, the phone passing from his hand to hers. "Eleanor." Sloane's voice came on, sharp and bright. How thoughtful. "A family dinner. We would be delighted. Wonderful," I said. "To make it feel like we are all family. Why do we not all contribute something? Just bring one of your signature items." This was a calculated test. The responses were exactly as I predicted. Caroline, via text, announced she would handle the wine, naturally. A case, I assumed, to prove her generosity and criticize my own cellar. Sloane said she would bring a floral arrangement, a way to place her own aesthetic centerpiece on my table before she even arrived. And Daniel, when I asked him privately what he might bring, just laughed. "Oh, Mom, you know me. I will bring the compliments for the chef. He would bring nothing. He would arrive empty-handed, a guest in his own history." My next call was to Martha. My instructions were precise. "Martha, I need you to arrive at 7:50, not a minute sooner. I will be serving dessert right at 8 o'clock, and that is when I will need you." 7:50 it is. "Eleanor," she said, the principal in her voice understanding the need for punctuality. She knew this was not an invitation. It was a summons. On Sunday morning, I set the stage. The dining room was the theatre. I cleaned the walnut table until it shone. And then I addressed the chair. My chair. The head of the table. I did not set a place setting there. I left it conspicuously empty, a vacuum of power. But I placed one thing on the seat itself, a small, delicate runner of Irish lace. It was old, cream-coloured, with age, and it had been my husband's favourite. He said it reminded him of his grandmother. It was a test of character. To sit there, Sloane would have to physically pick up and discard this piece of my past, or, worse, she would simply sit on it. I turned off the television in the living room. Silence, I knew, was unsettling. Instead, I put on a quiet, instrumental jazz playlist, just loud enough to be a sophisticated background hum, just quiet enough that a raised voice would sound vulgar. My armor was in my jacket pocket, hanging in the hall closet. I checked it one last time. The two envelopes, side by side. 1. The formal notice to vacate. 2. The proof of deposit. The evidence of the money. My fingers brushed the small, cold rectangle of the digital recorder in the other pocket. My final preparation was a call at 4:00, just before I put the chicken in the oven. I dialed Grant Alder's mobile number. "Mr. Alder. Eleanor Whitlow. I am just calling to confirm. I will be available. Mrs. Whitlow." His voice was a calm, dry reassurance. "My phone will be on, volume up, right here on my desk. If they demand to speak to your lawyer, You will have that option. Just press the speakerphone button. I hung up. I looked at the table, at the empty chair waiting for its usurper. I went to the mirror in the hall and looked at myself. I repeated the words Grant had told me, the words I had told myself. Do not cuss. Do not cry. Do not argue. This is not a fight. It is the delivery of a legal document. It is simply truth and procedure. Caroline Hart breezed in, followed by her husband, who said nothing, and Sloane, who was directing Daniel where to place her floral arrangement. Caroline surveyed my living room, her eyes doing a swift, cold appraisal. Eleanor, this is just so charming, she said, the word charming landing like a small stone. It reminds me of the cottage on our property, the one the groundskeeper uses. So much character in these smaller spaces. Our place, you know, is nearly 3 times the size. It is just impossible to keep clean, but one must. Sloane was already in the dining room, moving a fork 1/4 of an inch to the left. Mother, be nice. I think it is sweet. She looked up at Daniel, who was hovering uselessly. Danny, darling, you must be so relieved. We are finally getting the townhouse sorted through the proper family channels. She smiled at me. It is so important to get all that messy paperwork finalized after a wedding. We are so grateful to you for holding it. For him. Holding it. I smiled. That is an interesting way to put it. One of the cousins, who was already on his second glass of Caroline's wine, laughed. It is a smart move. After the wedding, selling this place to pay for the renovations on that one is the perfect strategy. A clean swap. There it was. The quiet assumption. The plan. Spoken aloud in a room where they believed I held no power. Selling this place. I looked at Daniel. His face flushed. He let out a short, forced laugh and looked at the floor. He did not defend me. He did not correct his cousin. His spine, which I had worked so hard to build, was now curved in perfect imitation of the heart's dismissive amusement. He was one of them. I mentally filed away the words, sell this place. Who, exactly, did they think had the authority to sell? I went to the kitchen to bring out the main course, the heavy roasting pan warm in my hands. This was the moment I had anticipated. When I returned, Sloane was standing by the head of the table. She looked at the empty chair, the one with my husband's lace runner on it. With a sigh of minor impatience, she picked up the lace, folded it haphazardly, and placed it on the side buffet. Then, she pulled the chair out, placed her expensive leather purse on the table beside the setting, and sat down. She was the queen, finally on her throne. There, she announced to the room, unfolding her napkin. Now we can finally begin properly. The air in the room was thick with her victory. Daniel was smiling. Caroline was smiling. The chess game was over, and they had won. And then, precisely at 7:50, the doorbell rang. A sudden, sharp silence fell. An interruption was not on their agenda. Sloane looked annoyed. Are you expecting someone else? Eleanor. As a matter of fact, I am, I said, putting the gravy boat down. I walked to the door and opened it. There was Martha Lowell, looking stern and reliable in a navy blue coat. She was holding a small notebook and her own pen. Martha, I said, my voice clear and loud enough for the dining room to hear. Thank you so much for coming. You are right on time for dessert. I led her back to the room. All eyes were on us. The Harts looked confused, their social circle momentarily breached by an unknown. "Everyone," I said. "This is Martha Lowell. She is an old, dear friend of the family. Martha, you know my son, Daniel, and this is his wife, Sloane, and her family, the Harts." Martha nodded, a principal's assessing gaze. "A pleasure." She did not sit. She simply stood near the entryway of the dining room, a silent, official presence. Sloane cleared her throat, ready to reclaim control. "Well, as I was saying, the plans for the kitchen." "Just a moment. Sloane?" I said. I walked not to my seat by the window, but to the pocket of my jacket, still hanging on the hook in the hall. I turned back to them. Martha was watching. The Harts were watching. Daniel was frozen. The jazz music had just faded into a quiet pause between songs. The atmosphere was perfectly still. It was enough. Sloane, annoyed by Martha's presence, but determined to reclaim the spotlight, set her wineglass down. "Well, as I was saying before I was interrupted," she began, pointedly not looking at Martha. "The plans for the Sycamore kitchen are final." She was back in command, sitting in my chair, describing the destruction of my property. "The first thing to go is that wall," she said, gesturing with her fork toward the wall behind the buffet. "It is completely archaic. We are knocking it down to create a proper, open-plan space. It is what our contractors advised. It needs air, light. You understand." The room was her audience. The Harts nodded in approval. I let the silence sit for a moment after she finished. "That is a significant project," I said. My voice was mild, curious. "Have you had a chance to review the structural report I believe that is a load-bearing wall?" Sloane let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a scoff, a sound of pure derision. "Eleanor, please. The Hart family contractors have built hospitals. I do not think they are worried about a report for one little wall. We know how to handle these things." She dismissed me, turning to her mother to roll her eyes. Caroline Hart, sensing a friction she found distasteful, immediately smoothed it over. "Sloane, darling, those are just details. That is what we pay people for." She turned her bright, brittle smile on me. "It is just about bringing the property up to Hart family standards. Eleanor, a formality, really. It will all be so much simpler once the papers are properly transferred to Daniel's name. It is always best to have clean lines. Do not you think?" "Clean lines," I repeated, letting the words settle. Daniel, who had been staring at his plate, seemed to feel this was his cue. He saw a moment to be the magnanimous new head of a household, the peacemaker. He fumbled for his wineglass and stood up, swaying slightly. "And on that note," he announced, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room, I want to thank Mom." He raised his glass toward me. "Thank you, Mom, for letting us use the house temporarily while we got all this sorted out. It has been a great help." The word letting hung in the air, a confession of his dependency. I saw Sloane's eyes narrow. It was a fractional, ice-cold movement, a look that went from me to him, a glare that clearly said, "You do not ask for permission." Daniel saw it. He faltered, the toast dying in his throat. "I mean, for it being the family house? And, well, to family." He finished lamely, taking a fast, large gulp and sitting back down. His duty done. The room was his. He had thanked me. Sloane had established her dominance. Caroline had drawn the new boundaries. Now, it was my turn. I had not touched my wine. I reached out and put my hand on my empty glass, then slowly, deliberately, set it down on the table. The small, solid clack of glass on wood cut through the remaining chatter. "Thank you. Daniel?" I said. The jazz music had stopped again. A perfect, quiet lull between songs. Before we bring out the apple crumble, there are 3 things that need to be made public. The word public hung in the air. It was a formal, cold, legal word. The atmosphere did not just chill, it froze. Caroline's smile became a rigid mask. Daniel's hand, which had been reaching for his water, stopped. Sloane's eyes, which had been dismissive, sharpened on me with a sudden, focused suspicion. In the corner, by the doorway, I heard a small, distinct click. Martha Lowell had taken the cap off her pen. She opened her small, spiral-bound notebook to a fresh page, her posture all business. She was no longer a guest for dessert. She was a witness. I did not stand. I did not need to. I reached into the right pocket of my black linen jacket. My fingers found the 2 envelopes I had prepared. I pulled out the first one. It was thick, legal-sized, and white. My heart was not pounding. That was the strangest thing. I felt a complete, cold clarity. My hands were steady. I placed the white envelope on the table in front of my unused plate. I looked up, meeting the collective, hostile stare of the hearts. My voice, when it came, was perfectly, terrifyingly, calm. I did not stand. I did not need to. I placed the white envelope flat on the wood. As I said, a formal announcement, and as this is the delivery of a legal notice, I will be recording this part of the conversation for accuracy. The recording is beginning now. I reached into my left jacket pocket and, with my thumb and forefinger, pressed the small button on the digital recorder. A tiny red light, invisible to them, confirmed it was active. Sloane let out an incredulous laugh. "Recording? What on earth for?" I did not answer her. I looked at the table. I slid the top sheet of paper from the envelope. I did not look at any of them. I looked at the words. I took the breath I had practiced. I, Eleanor Whitlow, as the sole and legal owner of the property located at 41 Sycamore Street, Maple Ridge, Illinois. I began, my voice low, slow, and perfectly even. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Do hereby serve this official notice on the basis of a fully executed and binding contract of sale, which was finalized last Tuesday. This notice requires all current residents, namely Daniel Whitlow and Sloane Hart, to vacate the premises within 14 days from today's date. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Sloane was the first to move. She shot out of my chair, her napkin falling to the floor. "What, no? You cannot be serious. You are lying. This is a joke." She looked at Daniel. "Tell her she is lying." Daniel. "This is absolutely not a joke," I said. "Eleanor, this is a pathetic scare tactic," Caroline Hart said, her voice like ice chips. "A truly vulgar performance. What is this about? Do you want money?" I ignored her. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out the second document, a certified copy of the original deed to the townhouse. I did not throw it. I did not wave it. I slid it across the polished walnut table. It stopped, perfectly centered, in front of Sloane's empty plate. "I am the owner," I said. I have always been the owner. You have been living there by my good graces. The house has been sold. As Sloane stared at the paper, stunned, I took the original notice I had just read and slid it toward the doorway. Martha, as witness. Martha Lowell stepped forward. She took the document, placed it on her small notebook, and signed her full name and the date on the witness line. Her movements were steady, practiced, and official. The scrape of her ballpoint pen on the paper was the loudest sound in the room. "Mom!" I turned. Daniel's hand was shaking so badly he had knocked over his water glass. Water was pooling on the wood, but no one moved to stop it. He had not looked at the deed. He was only looking at me, his face a mask of pale, childish terror. "Mum, why, how? How could you do this?" I finally turned my full attention to my son. My voice was not angry. It was not hurt. It was simply clear, like a glass of cold water. "Daniel, I am not doing anything to you. I am not taking anything that was yours. Your name was never on the deed. Your money never paid the taxes. Your labor never fixed the roof. I am not taking your house. I am simply stopping the loan." "This is not legal," Sloane finally shrieked, finding her voice. She snatched the deed from the table. This is elder abuse." "No. Wait. We will sue you. We will sue you for the improvements, for the money we put in. You will be hearing from the Hart family lawyers." This was the moment. The air was volatile, charged with her threats. My hand went into my pocket, my fingers resting on the recorder. I spoke clearly, projecting my voice towards Sloane, who was now standing, vibrating with rage. "Excuse me, Sloane? I did not hear that clearly," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Could you please state your legal threat again, for the record?" Sloane's mouth snapped shut. Her eyes darted from me to her mother. Caroline Hart's face was white with fury, her mask of civility gone. Daniel looked like he was going to be sick. The Hart cousin who had been so jovial was now staring, wide-eyed, at his uneaten chicken. The sound of silverware, of breathing, of civilized dining, had stopped completely. The only sound left was the quiet drip, drip, drip of Daniel's spilled water onto my floor. I reached into my right pocket again, past the first envelope, and pulled out the second. This one was thinner. I did not slide it. I held it up. "This is my second announcement," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "And this, Sloane, is not a threat. It is a receipt." I placed the paper on the table. It was the wire transfer confirmation. "This house is not for sale. It is sold. The buyer's deposit of over $60,000 cleared escrow 2 days ago. The new owners have a legal right to this property, and the handover date is in 21 days. I looked directly at Sloane, then at Daniel. My first statement was the notice. My second is the logistics. From this moment, all planned renovations are cancelled. Any changes, any removal of fixtures, any attempt to schedule contractors will be coordinated with the new owners. You have 14 days to vacate. You have 7 days to schedule a final walkthrough inspection with my representative. The finality of it hit Daniel like a physical blow. He did not just slump, he collapsed into his chair. He let out a sound, a dry, hiccuping sob. "Mom, I am sorry," he whispered into his hands. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." It was a pathetic litany, the apology of a boy who had been caught, not the remorse of a man. Sloane, however, was still trying to find an angle. The legal ground was gone. so she reached for the social one. You have humiliated us, she hissed, her face white with rage. You did this in front of... You have made the Hart family a laughingstock. She was trying to spin this as my failure of etiquette, my lack of class. But the word lawyers was gone. She had nothing. This was never about the Harts, I said, my voice quiet. This was about my boundaries. I reached for the last paper in my envelope. It was the offer Grant had drafted. I placed it in front of Daniel's weeping gaze. My third announcement, I said, is a humanitarian offer. It is not for the Harts. It is not for Sloane. It is for Daniel. I tapped the paper. This is an offer to pay the first month's rent and security deposit for a new apartment. It is contingent on one thing: your signature, Daniel, on a binding boundary agreement. It outlines specific terms: no further harassment, no unscheduled visits, no financial demands, and a clear, mutually agreed upon schedule for any future contact with me. I had offered him a lifeline, but it was attached to an anchor of accountability. Caroline Hart finally stood, her chair scraping loudly on the hardwood floor. Her face was a mask of pure, aristocratic fury. Eleanor, you are breaking this family. You are tearing your son's life apart. I stood up as well. I looked her directly in the eye. 62 years of life, looking at however many she had. This family, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying all the weight of the last 10 years, was already broken. Caroline. It was corroded. It was eaten away by contempt, by disrespect, by the quiet, constant assumption that my generosity was your right. I am not destroying a family. I am just cleaning my house. I walked to the head of the table. I picked up my husband's lace runner from the buffet, where Sloane had tossed it. I folded it gently. I looked at the chair, my chair. I pulled it back, setting it straight, but I did not sit. I stood tonight to read my announcement. Sloane, I said. As for the chair, you can have it, a memento for your 14 days. Before they could respond, Martha Lowell, who had been methodically documenting every step, raised her phone. She took a clear, high-resolution photograph of the notice of service, with her signature, and the pile of documents on the table. Sending this to your lawyer, Mr. Alder, right now. Eleanor, she said, her principal's voice full of authority. Email sent, with timestamp. The end was not loud. There was no more shouting. The Harts, for the first time, were silent. They had no moves left. There was only the sound of Martha's pen clicking, the tap of her phone screen, and the sound of Daniel Whitlow weeping into his hands at my dinner table. I walked to my front door. I opened it. The cool November air felt clean. I turned on the porch light, a bright beacon signaling it was time for my guests to leave. I stood by the door, waiting, breathing in the fresh, cold air, and I did not look back. I had chosen dignity. I had chosen, finally, myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video. And if you can, please support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.